I'm head of the Department of English and Languages at Coventry University, but in terms of research I'm an educational linguist, and what that means is that I started life as a linguist and I've now taught English and trained teachers of ELT around the world, and my research uses linguistic tools to analyse educational texts. So I look at student writing as a linguist, I look at classroom discourse as a linguist, and that's what my research focuses on. And the genres across the discipline is a good example of that work. We started writing genre across the discipline when we were at Warwick, when we were doing research on academic English. We were training teachers of EAP and English of specific purposes, and we were involved in developing English language materials for international students at the university. And we developed a project in order to answer questions that we felt hadn't been adequately answered about the nature of writing across disciplines at university, particularly the linguistic properties, that we didn't feel that there were adequate descriptions of those. As the title says, the genre across the discipline describes academic genres, ways of writing in English across many disciplines in the university. And our aim was not to describe one particular type of writing in detail. There have been lots of studies that have done that, but to develop a broad classification that could be useful to anyone interested in academic writing, to students, to lecturers, to researchers, to administrators. And basically what we did was, we start the book by explaining the corpus, the data that we collected in order to build our classification. And we collected several thousand texts from across many disciplines and many levels of study. And then we explain, having collected those texts, we then wanted to classify them in terms of their purpose. What was the purpose of writing a lab report? What was the purpose of doing a book review? What is the purpose of writing an essay in these different disciplines? And are there similarities across the disciplines? So for instance, when people do a book review in history, they basically have to describe the book and then evaluate it. When people do a product evaluation in engineering, they basically have to describe the tool and then evaluate it. So it's the same kind of processes and the same kinds of components, if you like, that are going into those two very different assignments. And we wanted to group these different genres, book reviews, evaluations, critiques, and into a family and say that this is one type of writing that students do at university, and we called it critiques. So we're working bottom up to try and classify the genres across the disciplines. We explain how we do that in the second chapter. And then the next 5 chapters describe the main genre families that we found. And these correspond to 5 very basic functions of university student writing. So the first thing that students have to be able to do is to demonstrate knowledge and understanding, the most up-to-date knowledge and understanding. That's what you expect people to come away from university able to do. And so in those types of genre, it would be particularly explanations. So basically when you're explaining something, you're not expected to give your own ideas on it. You're just supposed to understand how things work, how theories are, what things are across the different disciplines. First chapter looks at that. Second chapter looks at essays. Another thing a student's supposed to be able to do is to make an independent argument, to be able to have informed opinions and to express ideas, to sustain a coherent argument, to critique. So essays and critiques are described in the second chapter. The third chapter looks at research. Another characteristic that we expect of graduates is the ability to be able to conduct independent research projects. And there are 3 components to that. One is the literature survey, and we identified half a dozen different types of literature survey genre, but basically they all require the students to go out and see what other people do and to synthesize that literature. The second one is what we call methodology recounts, and these are basically the steps or procedures that people carry out in research projects. So a lab report would be a typical example of a methodology recount. And the third one are research reports. So these are the longer final year dissertation projects, for instance, that are included in there. So that's the third chapter. The fourth chapter looks at how university prepares students for professions. So these are the professional genres, things like case studies in medicine, case studies in business, proposals with catering proposals from research proposals, design specifications. These are found particularly in the sciences, in computer science and engineering, but also across other disciplines. and problem questions, which are found in the social sciences, in accounting and law and so on. So those genres are very much linked to particular professions, but again there were similarities across the disciplines, and those were described in that chapter. And then the final chapter looks at genres that really ask the students to learn about themselves. So these include reflective writing, they include narrative recounts where people say library research, they go and do a library research and then reflect on what they learned about the library research. And includes empathy writing, where they're asked to imagine that they're writing to an 18th century scientist. What would you ask them about how they discovered whatever they discovered? So there's a lot of sort of reflective writing in that, and the genres that belong to those genre families come in that chapter. And then in the final chapter we wrapped it all up and suggested areas for future research, and there are many of those. I think what we've done is just the beginning of a project that has a long way to go.
I work at Coventry University. I'm a professor in English language, and I'm particularly interested in English for academic purposes and corpus aspects of English for academic purposes. The process of setting up a corpus, I think in our case, we started with a plan. We had a grid, and we wanted to include roughly equal amounts of assignments in 4 levels of study. That's first, second year undergraduate, final year undergraduate and taught masters, and across 30 disciplines, which were categorised into 4 disciplinary groups. And so we set out to fill each cell in our grid, as it were, with, I think we wanted 200 assignments at each level in each disciplinary area. And we invited contributions from students who had produced proficient writing, that they'd got good marks for their writing when it was assessed by their subject tutors. We only took work that had been already marked and assessed by subject tutors. And we appealed to those students to contribute, and we paid them for every assignment that they submitted to us. But it was a long process. It was a long and difficult process to get that writing in. And of course we had to ask for their permission to use the writing. It's quite difficult to create a corpus of student writing, and I think that's the reason why the Bohr corpus is really the only one of its kind at the moment, that's in the public domain at least. That's because in some areas it's difficult to persuade students, the right kind of students who are producing proficient writing, to contribute their work. There are practical problems actually with final year students, because by the time they have got their assignments back from their tutors, it's nearing the end of the year, and then of course they've left the university. So it's much easier to get first year writing than it is to get final year writing. And in some disciplines, especially disciplines which were housed a long way from the collection points, it was difficult to persuade students to come along and contribute. It seems that in some subjects the students are not so easily lured by payment as well. Computer scientists aren't very lured by £10. They don't seem to think that's quite enough to persuade them. I think we were surprised how widespread the genre families were across disciplines. That's one of the strengths of the classification system, that the genre families do not map exclusively onto disciplines. Every genre family occurs in at least 7 disciplines in the corpus, and many of the genre families occur across almost all the disciplines. So that's very helpful for teachers who are working with students from a number of different disciplines in the same class. Academic writing tutors, for example, who have got students from a variety of disciplines, they can talk in general terms about a genre family and know that it will apply to across disciplines. And it's also very useful for the increasing number of interdisciplinary studies. There are quite a lot of degree courses now draw on a number of different disciplines. I think that having the genre families that we write about in the book it's a very useful concept for students and teachers. I find it myself now when I'm looking at a piece of student writing and I feel that it's somehow not achieving what it set out to achieve, I can very often explain that to the student in terms of genre family. For example, a student who has been required by the lecturer to produce an argument, for example, and is simply reproducing received knowledge about the subject, is writing an explanation rather than an essay. And maybe the lecturer never made that clear to the student when they set the assignment. Maybe the lecturer assumed that the student would know that they were supposed to put in develop an argument through the writing. And maybe the student didn't realise that. And you can explain that in terms of genre families. You can draw attention to differences between genre families. You can place their assignment task within a genre family and they understand then what they're supposed to be doing.
I think it's important to research genres because they tell us about how we live our lives. They're culturally embedded, and when you realize how the culture and the purpose and the staging and the language all link together in the context, and this is where I think systemic functional linguistics is really powerful because it gives us a theoretical framework for linking the lexicogrammar, the little bits of language and grammar and vocabulary, right through the different situations to the cultural contexts and the discourses, the academic discourses, the political discourses that are assessment discourses that are all intersecting at the top level. And genre has a way of sort of uniting all of those and helping us not only understand how academic writing works in university contexts, but to look at the evidence for that. We really enjoyed working on this project, and I think it was very enjoyable, partly because of the super research team that we had with us, and particularly Paul Thompson and Paul Wickens, who were co-researchers on the project. Also because of the number of numerous research assistants and research fellows who did all the work going out and collecting the assignments and helping us with interviewing staff. And so the staff that we interviewed, the university lecturers and the students that we also interviewed and that we also collected data from, I think we couldn't have done the project without them, from a number of universities where we collected the data, all in England. And finally, in terms of the book, bringing that to fruition, I think we really have to thank the people at Cambridge University Press, Joanne and Anna and her colleagues.